As Marjorie Stoneman Douglas once wrote famously, there is only one Everglades, and keeping it alive and healthy takes a constant flow of water south from Lake Okeechobee.
And then there are the growers and Big Sugar, who are, in this case, the competing interests in a Senate bill that would have given them first dibs on that lake water. Hundreds of South Florida boaters converged on the Capitol this week to object, and leading them, Eric Eikenberg, president of the Everglades Foundation, who, on its behalf, maneuvers the powers who be in Tallahassee. Hello to you. So good to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me, Glenna. Michael, good to be with you.
Eric, it's great to have you back. All right, so to set the scene here, Glenna was in Tallahassee. I've been following it, though. I mean, here we are well into the session. Suddenly, the Senate President, Wilton Simpson, rolls out Senate Bill 2508, which basically says that the agricultural interests, Big Sugar and others south of Lake Okeechobee, are going to have the lion's share of the water from the lake. I mean, they're going to force the South Florida Water Management District to do that. So pick up the story then. What did you and fishermen and others come to Tallahassee? How did you turn it around?
Well, Michael, 2 weeks ago when that bill was introduced late on a Friday evening, once we realized what the intent here was, we immediately mobilized. And these fishing guides, these small business owners, representatives of local chambers of commerce, they all rallied and moved up to Tallahassee to make their voices known. You're exactly right. This is about water. We take for granted our water here in South Florida, but when this bill was introduced, it was clear that the balanced plan that was introduced in the fall by the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District was going to provide that balance of Lake Okeechobee water to all users, from South Florida to the both coasts, east and west, and including the sugar industry to the south. This legislation was clearly an attempt to stop that balanced plan.
Why? Who and why? Name names.
Well, Lake Okeechobee is the water supply for the sugar industry. It's also, as we move water south, it recharges the aquifer, which is the water supply for 9.5 million people that live in South Florida, including Broward and Miami-Dade counties. So when this legislation was putting a straitjacket on the South Florida Water Management District to hold water in Lake Okeechobee, that's to the benefit of the industry south of Lake Okeechobee. And from our perspective, and from the governor's perspective, we have to stop all of this blasting of polluted water to the St. Lucie estuary, to the Caloosahatchee. Florida Bay and the Florida Keys is desperate for fresh water. It needs to be stored, cleaned, and sent south through the Everglades.
So didn't we, the collective we, public, learn that lesson when a few summers ago we saw all this horrible toxic algae and muck on both coasts, and then kind of got a really great education of how to stop it, and then it stopped by managing that lake water better and then sending it south. And this is, I'll just throw out there, this is such a complicated process and a complicated bill. So weren't those lessons learned? We were just looking at video of that yucky green stuff on the water. Isn't that sort of the point set match of not going back to what was?
Exactly right. That is exactly the point. From in years 16, 18, 20, we saw toxic blue-green algae, that guacamole in the water that was killing fish. It was hurting businesses. There was a hotel operator that testified before the Senate that said his hotel lost more revenue due to the toxic water from Lake Okeechobee than they did from COVID. So this was clearly a rallying cry to end the practices of dumping billions of gallons of dirty, polluted water. Instead, the Lake Okeechobee plan that was released in September is going to give the Army Corps and the state of Florida the flexibility it needs to lower the lake in the dry season, November through May, send water south through the River of Grass that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas talked about, under the beautiful bridges along Calle Ocho, Tamiami Trail, and then ultimately that water makes its way to Everglades National Park and to Florida Bay. That's the balance, Glenna and Michael, that we need within the Everglades. Lake Okeechobee should not be the source of water for one industry.
Yeah. Eric, one of your key objections, and that of Governor Ron DeSantis, who has been, to his credit, a strong supporter of Everglades restoration, was that this was going to put in jeopardy that huge reservoir that we've been talking about, you've been talking about for years, south of the lake, that would filter the lake water, which is full of toxic materials, so that then it could be released to flow south into the Everglades and Florida Bay. So what is the argument? Explain sort of the argument why that reservoir is just critical to Everglades restoration.
Well, when Lake Okeechobee rises, the only option today is for the gates on the east and west coast, the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee. They open up, and again, billions of gallons of fresh water is wasted to the Atlantic Ocean and to the Gulf of Mexico. This reservoir, which was authorized by the U.S. Congress back in the year 2000, Michael. We've been waiting 22 years for this project. Senate Bill 10 in the year 2017 allowed that process to start. Now, this reservoir on 16,000 acres directly south of the lake, once built, will be that new outlet to store that water. We have to clean it because, again, it's polluted from Lake Okeechobee. There are 60,000 acres of wetlands that will remove the phosphorus and the nitrogen so that we can flow clean, fresh water through the River of Grass and to the south. This reservoir is long overdue. The bill that was filed 2 weeks ago was going to deprioritize the funding for that project. That was another argument that we cannot reverse the momentum that we see today.
All right, so late this week, there was a little glimmer of hope, and we're going to talk more about that when we talk more with Eric Eikenberg, and we'll come right back. Stay tuned. We are back with Eric Eikenberg, president of the Everglades Foundation, about Senate Bill 2508, which really complicated, boiled down. It controls the water flow out of Lake Okeechobee and talks about funding that opponents think might really jeopardize that big reservoir project for the Everglades. How'd I do with that headline? So late, was Wednesday, I think, actually not that late this week, Wednesday, after all of this rallying and these voices of opposition and the hundreds of voters that went there, and there was an amendment, and it sweetened the pot a little bit. I'm frankly not quite sure I understand what that amendment does that's so good, so you take it away.
Well, there were a tremendous amount of lines, maybe a couple hundred lines from the original bill that were removed. I mentioned the straitjacket that this legislation was going to place on the South Florida Water Management District. That's been removed. The EAA reservoir that Michael was speaking of before the break, south of the lake, that priority of putting $64 million directly to the construction on an annual basis returns. There are a few items that they've made commitments on the Senate floor to resolve during the budget conference with the House. Our perspective is the House should not accept the Senate position in those negotiations. So the House of Representatives, when the state budget is being negotiated, should stay strong and not accept 2508. But I'll say, Glenna, with hundreds of fishing boat captains going to Tallahassee, that is the sign and the visibility of the 21st century economy here in this state. We are driven by clean water. We're driven by tourism, fishing, boating. What makes our state great is the outdoors. And we want to ensure that, again, the momentum and the efforts that have been in place for the number of years under Governor DeSantis's efforts remain in place. And that's why this amendment is a good step forward. We're going to watch it now over the next 3 weeks before session concludes to make sure that no additional harm is taken.
Yeah, well, hats off to all those charter boat captains, fishermen who lost revenue for a couple of days. I mean, this cost them money to go up there, and and the squeaky wheel did get the grease. But Eric, tell us, I mean, this amendment is good, but it's not really a done deal yet. What do you need to have happen?
No, it's not a done deal, Michael. And again, there's about 3 weeks left of the legislative session. When the House and Senate come together over the next week or so to begin the negotiations on the $100+ billion state budget, this 2508 will be part of that negotiation. So the cleanest way to be rid of all this is for the House not to accept the Senate position. Governor DeSantis has made it clear that he wants to continue to protect the Everglades. We have identified two provisions that need to come out of the bill, including tying the funding for Everglades restoration to the passage of 2508. That's the tripwire that is certainly a concern to many of us. And there is a commitment from the Senate to work through that item. We're going to remain vigilant that it certainly does.
So we have, as you noticed, no one from the sugar industry with us today. Certainly this bill is to protect the water for that industry. And I certainly don't speak for Big Sugar, but certainly need to get their perspective in that they need water. So is there a balance here that gives agriculture and growers what they need while still protecting the Everglades and all the projects?
Glenna, that's a great question, because the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual that was released in September provides 3 times the amount of water south to the Everglades, and the sugar industry would receive the water it needs. The reservoir that we were speaking about just momentarily, when that is constructed, 1/3 of that water from the reservoir will go to the sugar industry. So the sugar industry itself is accounted for as it relates to water from the lake, from this reservoir. But we also have to take into account the 2 estuaries, the Everglades, South Florida, and our drinking water. When viewers turn on the tap at home, that's fresh water from the Everglades that must be protected. We need to send that water south throughout the course of a year, not just at times when the sugar industry or other interests are in need for it. This is a balanced approach. It must remain in place.
Yeah, well, to that, we can only say amen. We want to turn on the tap and get the water and have clean water, and for the Everglades to prosper, and for all the work you do, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Glenna.